Hey everyone, welcome back. Brand new Take Aim podcast. Excited to get the show out and excited to talk some hunting. We got an awesome show with Evan Williams from Hoyt. And Evan is used to be, I should say, resident of Kansas. Now he works for Hoyt, so he's out in Utah, but comes home every year to deer hunt, mostly mule deer hunt out in western Kansas. And this year he took some of those mule deer tactics and shot a great whitetail with bow out at 55 yards. Actually, I think it was, 63 yards. Just unbelievable story, just effort and continuing to grind it out. Evan shot, just an awesome buck. But great show, so much good bow hunting tips in it, and I know you guys will absolutely enjoy. So, as always, enjoy the show. We'll see you guys again next week. Guys, as you know, I'm an avid user of the HuntStand app. If you have not seen or had the chance to upgrade to the HuntStand Pro, make sure you do. But there's a revolutionary new trail camera management software available through HuntStand if you're a HuntStand Pro user. But amazing features at no extra charge. So make sure you upgrade to the HuntStand Pro. Use the code TakeAim10 at checkout. All right, boys and girls, we are back. Brand new Take Aim podcast, and excited to get back in the swing of things. Excited to talk this episode, an awesome deer hunting story. That's what we put out during deer season mostly, is just awesome deer stories. And excited to have Evan Williams on. And Evan, what's happening, man?
Oh, not a whole lot. Just trying to recover from November and kind of get back into the swing of things in the office.
Exactly. Which at the moment the listeners haven't seen, but the media art, Evan, basically has, like you behind your deer. The bow is kind of blurred out. The Take Aim logo will kind of be right there. But for everybody wondering why that's blurred out, Evan, let kind of people know who you are and who you work for, and that kind of explains why that bow is blurred out at the moment.
Yep. So I work for the Hoyt marketing team. I'm the pro staff manager. So, yeah, that is a 2021 early run prototype. So that's why she's blurred out.
Early 2021. So, well, I don't know what you can or can't talk about, Evan, but with being, down the middle as you can be, but how'd the bow perform for you, and were you more than thrilled with it throughout that hunt?
Oh, extremely. I am running the aluminum this year over the carbon. Had an opportunity last December to sit down with our engineering team, and for the first time in a long time, the marketing team was able to kind of get involved with some things on that conceptual engineering development process. And with my background coming from a shop where I worked for 10 years in a pro shop, one of the things I'm very, very particular in the bow I choose to shoot and why. I'm very, very spec oriented, so I'm looking at, what's the string angle going to be like? What's the cam going to be feel wise at my draw length? Where's my draw length going to put me in the cam? And so I dive into the numbers very, very deep. And in that meeting, our VP of Engineering, Zach Kurtzall, goes, what do you want to see? Like, Evan, you're coming from a shop. If you were able to build a bow right now, give me the specs. Like, what would you want? Axle, brace height, speed, draw length, range to the cams. Like, where do you want to see those performances at? And so we just sit down and had that conversation, and I literally got everything I asked for in this bow. And so,
wow, that's a lot. That's cool.
Yeah, when I got it here in my office to go do some testing and playing around, I dived in head first. I was able to take it on the second trip I made to Colorado elk hunting this year, and then I ended up making 2 trips back to Kansas to try and seal a deal on a whitetail. And from temperatures anywhere from, I think it was 4 degrees the morning I was able to harvest him, all the way up to, I think it was 90, 93 one day when I was hunting in elk camp. It was absolutely phenomenal. One of the best timed bows I've ever had. And I get a new bow, I put it on my last chance and put it right onto the draw board, and I typically let it sit in my garage for 12 to 24 hours, just kind of trying to seat the serving down into the cam track and kind of cut in on that shoot-in period. And it has not moved a 1/16 of an inch on me. It's been phenomenal. It's one of those I always go back and double check and what's my tailor doing through paper? It's been 3 or 4 weeks, and every single time I drop back there into engineering and pop one through paper, it's been spot on. So it's been fun, playing with different broadheads and just kind of seeing how they're tuning one versus another. And I've run anyone from the Iron Will vented to a Ramcat Sever 2-inch, the Mini Mag from Grim Reaper, and then their Pro Series 3-blade expandable. I've got all of those broadheads out to 85 yards hidden together. It's been phenomenal.
That is so. That's really good.
Yeah.
So
super excited.
So let me ask, Evan, with the pro shop background, and I know at your heart of hunting, so to speak, you're a whitetail and a mule deer guy. So what aspects did you kind of go from? Was it more of the spot and stalk from, or tree stand accessible, shorter axle to axle, and the convenience of that kind of the same rig, to me, works well with mule deer hunting. So what did you kind of take? Was it those sort of items, or was it something you had worked and learned on from pro shops?
Coming from the pro shops, I was in a position where, again, I've got enough to do one bow financially, and where I'm trying to do indoor spots, outdoor spots, 3D, and try to hunt with it. I've always gotten along with a longer axle bow, better head position, so I get better string angle, and it feels more comfortable to me. I get typically a little bit better speed because of where I'm at in the cam on a longer bow. So I played with our short and I played with our long, and with the same arrow, I was a pound difference between the two. But the longer axle to axle for me, because of where I fall in that cam, I was almost 10 feet per second faster. So again, I went to our longer version, and I've never had an issue with a 34, 35-inch bow, whether I'm on the ground spotting and stalking, sitting in a tree stand, or even doing ground blinds with turkey or deer. So I favor that longer axle to axle for me at 28.5 inches.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've shot a lot. From whitetail side to mule deer side, I've shot a lot of bows that axle to axle have been right in that 32 to 34 inch range, and I'm kind of with you. I don't see a problem within that range. I don't think, me personally, I want to go beyond that, but I'm also not somebody that's 6'5" either. I'm pretty 5'7", 5'8", and 155 pounds. So that bow just fits me well, but it also isn't the curve in the archery industry lately has been 32, 30, and now we're down to 28 inches. But I'm good with all those bows shooting wise, feel wise, 30 to 34 inches.
Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of been my comfort range is on that, really that 34, 35 area. it sits there. Like you can really see it, especially if you get side shots of where that string angle is hitting, and how much head lean. If I get under that 32-inch mark, like you were saying, I really got to lean to get my nose down and create that extra contact point for an anchor, and I don't like it. Like I want my head upright, and as soon as I hit my anchor point, string's right there. Like I don't have to shift my head, and that's where that 34, 35 has always really fallen for me. So my head is in more upright position. I'm looking straight through my eye socket, so I'm not having to look through the upper side of my eye socket, which creates eye fatigue because you do that for 10, 15, 20 seconds. You're reducing the amount of oxygen flow to your eyes. So now what you're seeing and what's actually going on, you're starting to create a longer delay. And when you're talking milliseconds between that buck taking a step or still standing there, that slight delay in what you're seeing because of eye fatigue can make the difference between I'm making a good shot or he actually just got a partial step on me and now I'm, back in the diaphragm or potentially even guts depending on how quick he's taking a step.
Sure. Yep. Exactly. What was one of the other main choices, Evan, with you kind of rolling towards aluminum versus you get, Hoyt's famous for the carbon, but what was that all about? Was it just your input was more geared towards aluminum, and was that your preference?
No, I wanted the mass weight, to be very honest. I love shooting carbons. I've run them since 2010 when they first were introduced by us. And early season, high country, I can keep things super light, super simple, cover a lot of miles without the extra fatigue. But what I always found when I went home to Kansas is I know I'm going to be dealing with wind. And if I'm truly going out and pursuing mule deer the way I want to, it's open, there's not a lot of vegetation or cover, you're exposed, and I know I need to prepare for a 30-plus mile-an-hour wind if it really gets going. And so I'm packing all this weight on, and when you do it, you start creating more surface area because you're adding weight further out on a stabilizer. So the big factor for me was the aluminum bow is heavier right out of the box, and it's all around my hand. So it's going to hold a little bit better, the balance will be there, and I don't have to add extra length to stabilizers to get the balance and proportionality of the weight the way I want to. And one of the mornings we were out there, we were hunting in a 40 to 50 mile an hour gusty day, and it was holding steady at 30 to 35.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. That's cool. That's very neat. Well, that's super exciting to talk about. I know that there's stuff obviously right now you can't tell us all, but that's great that you actually got to put it through its paces, so to speak, in totally pretty diverse weather conditions. Man, that's pretty awesome.
Yep. It's been a fun run with it this year already for sure. So,
switching gears back to the hunting side, because I'll talk bow stuff with you all day, Evan, and I don't want to get to the point where you're like, we can't talk about it, but I'm super excited to talk to you about this deer you killed out in your home state of Kansas and just kind of how you did it. And, like one thing that over the past couple of years, it's far back as I can remember knowing you, Evan, it seems like you've done a lot of work in Kansas kind of just on the ground, hunting spot and stalk style. So give me a little bit of background and just how you have learned to hunt like that, so to speak, and what you did this year, what you have learned and what you did this year to help you kill that deer.
Yeah. So, I grew up in western Kansas in a really, really good mule deer area, and just have always been fascinated by them. And that country is so open that when I started bow hunting, I needed to find a way to close that distance in open terrain, even with an animal looking at me. And a really good buddy who was working with my mom at the time started a heads-up decoy company. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like, I look like a deer moving out on them. And so I adopted the 2D bow-mounted decoy system starting in, I think 2010 was the first year I ran it. And it truly is a game changer. It's one of those you can move, you can make some noise, you can let them see as you're, trying to go cover to cover and bounce around a little bit. And bucks, for the most part, especially during that rut, are really accepting of you, and it lets you get in and get away with a lot of things. And right off, I'll tell you guys, I'm not known for being a whitetail guy. The last whitetail I killed, 2014, and then before that, May, 2008? So I tend to go like 6 or 7 years between harvesting whitetail, and it's simply because of my passion for muleys. And had a good run of luck with mule deer the last couple of years, taking 3 open young bucks on the same piece of public ground out there, and was getting a lot of guff for it. Like, you're going back to Kansas and you're hunting mule deer, you're not even hunting whitetail. Like, it's one of the best whitetail states. What are you doing? So I told myself that I was just not going to look at mule deer at all this year, and it was whitetail or bust. I was going to eat a tag, and I'm real fortunate. I've got a buddy who's got a pretty good piece of property, and it's got a good pocket of genetics. The neighbors are really, really strict in their management principles, and there's only 3 of us that are allowed to hunt this 2-mile square section.
Wow.
And got everything ready, and I know it fairly well. Back in 2014, the last whitetail I killed, I had changed jobs, and the job I went to, my boss was like, everything I need from you right now can be done from a computer at home as long as you have access. So why don't you take this opportunity to go back and hunt your Kansas tag and just, do some afternoon and some evening work, and we'll get through what we can, but just, take these next 3 weeks before we really need you in-house to go hunt. I was like, well, that's awesome, because I just got a phone call that I've got a 200-inch mule deer running around I need to go find.
Right.
And
that's a nice gift, both calls.
Yeah, right. And this 200-inch mule deer is on a piece of property where I've got 4 bucks that are 175 and bigger as mule deer, and I'm looking at 15 to 18 different whitetails that are anywhere from, 2.5-year-old 120-inch bucks to, I'm looking at a 6.5-year-old that's 220, and they're all on the same, 1,200 acres. And had my sights set on one of those mule deer, and had an opportunity to stalk in on a bedded buck, and used my mule deer doe decoy to shoot this whitetail, and got him up out of his bed and decoyed him in from 150 yards, and I shot him at 12 feet in the wide open pasture grass. So,
wow.
I've adapted and used decoys on the ground ever since, and knowing I was going in there for whitetails this year was all ready. I picked up a tethered saddle system. That way I could be a little more mobile the way this property is lined up, and got in there.
Which is a great option for that area.
Yeah, and exactly. They're not using this trail. They're using one that's 40 yards over, hop down and slide. And it's, lightweight, easy to get up and down, super quiet, and had about 75 head of cattle in the only patch of trees I could hunt in the 2-mile square.
Wow.
And the deer were avoiding it like it was the plague. They would not go within 100 yards of a tree on that property. So my only option was I had 2 little small CRP draws. Everything else was either cut wheat, cut milo, or cut corn. So I was setting up on any little fence line or any little pocket of grass that I could, and most of the time I was carrying in 3 decoys. I had a 3D body decoy. I had my heads up, which I used as a whitetail buck, and then I also had an ultimate predator doe decoy that I could bow mount as well. And the reason for that system is setting up in the grass. You can use that 3D decoy very close to you, like 12 yards or closer. And when you're sitting in the grass, I put the ultimate predator doe on, and it looks like you have a mature posturing buck over a bedded doe waiting to breed.
Yeah, that's a very cool idea.
If that wasn't getting their attention and they're moving in one of those grassy areas that I could get into, or bedding up in one of the CRP pockets, I can leave the 3D out or set him down, take the doe decoy off, and now I can mount that buck decoy to my bow and get into that 60 to 40 yard range of that buck that's already bedded with a doe, give him a grunt call and let him come into me and let him be the aggressor at that point.
Right.
So running a 3 decoy system, and it ended up being 17 days on the ground trying to pull this off.
Wow. So let me interject real quick, Kevin. I got a couple little questions for you. So Kansas, do you have to decide as a resident, non-resident, are you picking a mule deer tag versus a whitetail tag, or can you get both if you draw both?
As a non-resident, when you apply, you get to pick your unit. And if you're applying for a unit that has mule deer stamps, tags as an option, you then, at the same time of your application, can put in for your mule deer stamp.
Okay.
If you draw, because you put in for the stamp, your name is now rolled into the draw to have the mule deer stamp added. If you get that, you still get 1 buck tag, but it is an either species whitetail or mule deer tag.
Okay.
If you don't
that makes sense.
The stamp, you retain your whitetail only.
Whitetail only.
Yep.
Okay. That totally makes sense. I've only hunted the eastern side of the state where the mule deer are far and few between. So I've never remotely even thought about putting in for the mule deer stamp. But that's interesting. No, and just thought it was worthy to point out in the podcast. But so going from there, Evan, how long did it take you to kind of get used to using those decoys as it goes on your bow? Obviously, I'm sure you did some practice, but just trials and tribulations of just more or less hunting with it and getting the feel of knowing how to pressure or not pressure, hold back. It's go time versus not go time. How long did it kind of take you to get that rhythm?
Well, you got to learn something new every day. So I'd like to say, it took me, no time at all and we were up and running, but you learn something new even this year. I've been running decoys on my bow for 10 years now, and it never fails. Every situation is different. You're always learning. I was successful with it the first year I had it, and I think it was one of those, beginner luck meets just sheer dumb. Oh, what did I just get myself into? And this worked. I had found a good buck. It was a big non-typical in July on one of my scouting trips, and I actually went back. I hunted that buck for 21 days, and in 20 of those 21 days hunting, I never laid eyes on him. I don't know where he went. I don't know what hole he dug himself into, but on the morning of the 21st day I was hunting, he just randomly showed up in a cut cornfield, literally 300 yards from where I had seen him in July. and he ran 3 does up into this big CRP and yucca patch surrounded by cut wheat. And I had a great access point, hiked up through a little saddle in the pasture, crawled under the fence into the CRP grass, and could see him bedded at about 60 yards. It was just thin enough I could make out times. So I stuck that doe decoy on, and as I went to go hit my grunt tube, I looked around and I had about 4 does stand up all around me, and I literally was in the middle of 27 mule deer
Holy
that I
cow.
crawled into.
No way.
And I had seen this buck and like 2 or 3 does go into this pocket and thought there was 3 or 4 deer in there, and there ended up being 27 deer in this 3-acre little CRP patch.
Wow.
And those does stood up, saw my decoy, started getting edgy, and then literally left and right, front and behind, just random bucks started standing up out of their beds and started running around checking these does that were all of a sudden on their feet. And one of the does was about 45 yards in front of me, and I watched that buck stand up and come over to check her, and he turned broadside as she spun, and that was the moment I needed. So I literally, from the time I saw him to the time I had an arrow in him, was less than 20 minutes.
Wow, you're kidding me.
So, yep. And what I have found is whitetail are definitely more aggressive with it. You can use a buck or a doe. I've had a lot of good responses both ways. Mule deer wise, the does tend to work better for me because the bucks that I've had the most success with have been those lone bucks out cruising that have left a harem and are just on their own moving. And you get where they
looking
can see
for
that
another
decoy.
doe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And and if you guys have watched either the Hoyt Instagram or my stuff at all, you've probably seen the video of my brother holding the doe decoy, and I'm right on his shoulder, and that buck jumps the fence at 35 yards, and we stick him. That hunt was less than 20 minutes. We decoyed that buck off of 2 does in a cut cornfield on private ground from 300 yards, and we were on the public side and did not have permission until that buck landed when he jumped that fence.
Wow. Yeah,
it's
such an amazing video, too. I mean, it's mind-blowing. Such a cool video to see you guys there with the decoy and the way it jumps the fence, and obviously it jumped the fence for you guys. It's just remarkable footage.
Yep. Yeah,
Love it.
And again, I would much rather be on the ground with the decoy knowing I have more control. I can, if the wind changes on me, I can shift my approach. If I'm going in on a whitetail that's got a doe bedded in grass, I just have to get to where he can either just see me or within earshot. And if I run at him with a buck decoy and hit a grunt, it's just like a bull elk. You're inside of his comfort zone. You're now threatening to take his lady from him. Here he comes. And if you do it, you better know it's a buck you're going to shoot, because if he commits, you're shooting in self-defense.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah, he's coming on basically attack mode, like he's coming to fight.
Yep, he's coming in, and he's coming in sideways. He's bristled, ears are laid back, and as soon as you get a good clear shot, like, it's going to get western. And if you listen to Danny, Matt, and I talk about bow hunting with bow-mounted decoys on the Hoyt Bowhunting podcast, you really have a lot of time, and you can get away with a lot. That decoy covers up so much of you as the hunter that when you go to draw or you go to move a little bit and that decoy shakes on your bow, to them it's just like they're shaking their hide, or they took a step, or they flicked an ear. Like, it's just natural movement. Once they're coming in, they've already accepted you as whatever is on your bow, and you don't have to rush. Enjoy the show they're going to put on for you.
Right.
Take that 5-yard shot, knowing every pin in my sight is on you. There's no way you're making it out of this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, at that point of commitment, there is depending on how much time he gives you, but it's your time. He's like you said, that word commitment it's already happened, and it's kind of neat when it does happen, and it's neat that you recognize it because you're like, man, it should be game over here shortly, which is phenomenal.
Yep.
So
and does don't like it so much. So if you're on a buck like the situation I had where I was in a cut cornfield, those does saw that decoy and they got edgy and moved off, and the buck I killed kept following them, but he kept following them into areas I could shoot. So I actually drew on that buck 3 different times before I was able to finally let it go.
Wow. Well, let's get into that real quick, Evan. Like that property, had you really been able to scout it much before, had you located this deer previously, or what did you know, like going into this hunt?
I knew that I had cut corn for ag. I knew that I still had cattle in the trees and in the pasture. And I knew on the neighbors to the south, there was cattle in both pastures, and the bedding area was 150 to 160 yards past the fence line I was allowed to hunt.
Okay. Is there pressure to the south on that side?
The landowners, his 2 boys hunt, both archery, and then the younger boy, both of his kids hunt firearms, and I think they're 12 and 14 now, or 11 and 13, something like that. So they don't get a ton of pressure at all.
Right.
You can grunt, you can rattle, you can decoy, you can pretty much throw the kitchen sink at them, and depending on how many deer you're seeing in a night and how those does are reacting to you, kind of sets the tone. And I haven't been able. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention the food. Did that give you the ag? Did that give you a sense of just kind of comfort? Like, hey, at least twice a day, I probably have a chance to get in between them. Was that just part of your agenda for that hunt?
It really was. We were fighting the moon phase. We had a full moon on Halloween, and so I wasn't seeing deer movement till the last 45 minutes to an hour of light, and I still had to get them to travel almost 200 yards before they were even on property I could potentially do something with.
Okay.
So the first 2 or 3 days, I was really hanging back, trying to see what time the deer were coming out, which location were they coming out of the trees, which one of the 2 draws were they going to come up, and where were they going to enter this field. Saw 30, 35 deer the first night, and kind of picked a target buck. He's a big, heavy 9. He's a solid 175 buck. We thought he might touch 180. Had 2 really, really nice 8-points. The one that was higher on my list was probably a low 150s. The other one was really heavy, but he had broken off his left main beam right at his G2. Still probably had like 5.5 inches of mass at his G2 and 10-inch brow tine. So he's super mature. I've got enough sheds in my head. I got some good taxidermists that can reconstruct him if I had that opportunity. And then had a really good 9 that was hanging out. And in 17 days, I saw the big 9 12 times. I saw the busted up 8 15 times. I saw the other big 8 or 9 times. Like, they were very, very consistent. I knew every night I was going to see at least 2 of the shooter bucks that were running around there. But could just
that's cool.
Never got in a situation where I had the decoy set in a position where they were close enough that they weren't chasing a doe, or there was a doe in close enough that the buck was going to check and I could get in between them, or the doe saw me and, no, I don't want to be anywhere around you, and they bolted. Buck saw that, looked at the decoys, and went the other direction. So mentally it was one of the hardest hunts I'd ever done, because literally I'm setting up 100 yards off a fence line, 100 yards from a tree line, in the middle of a cut cornfield. There is nothing around me for 100 yards. So as soon as they jump that fence, they can see me. So
right. Now, Evan, have you ever, and maybe it's so much more fun using the decoy system the way you do it, but have you ever thought of just using a pop blind and brushing it in? And you probably have, obviously, but why haven't you? What's the caveat to not doing that?
And on this piece, I've got 2 spots I can put a blind in that I would consider. One of them is on the south edge of the property I can hunt where the tree line meets the fence line. And then on the east side of that property where my crop field ends and the neighbor's bullpen starts on that fence line, there's a big pile of fire brush. And that's where I've been setting up a lot of the nights, just sitting on the ground. And the biggest reason I didn't want to do one down on the tree line is when I went down there and reevaluated it, where I would put that blind to be able to brush it in, put me 5 feet off the trail where they were jumping that fence.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's close for comfort.
And yeah, and I knew, like, I didn't know I was going to get a second trip, so knowing I only had 7 days to get in there, I didn't feel that was enough time to get that blind in there and get them comfortable with it to have a good enough opportunity. And so I considered putting it up in the patch of weeds, but my problem there is if they get out and they're outside of my range and aren't committing, it's really hard for me to unzip and get out of a blind and then go after them, versus I'm already on the ground and I've got a decoy and they've seen me and they're not spooked. They may let me get aggressive and move on them because I'm already there.
Right. Sure.
So
yeah, it makes total sense.
That's the biggest reason why I didn't use a blind in this case. Now, in the future, there's a little erosion ditch that comes. It's basically where I was setting up, and what I would do is I would dig that erosion ditch out just a little bit, keeping the dirt close. After I talked to the landowner, he's like, well, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. And then I would literally set it up in the middle of that cornfield and then brush it in once it's all cut and just have it out there. And that would potentially work because it's easier to get out there. But
right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you spend that kind of time in there looking at where they're coming out, how they're moving, where they want to be. And I haven't hunted that property. I've hunted it 2 times since I killed my buck on it in 2014.
Oh, okay. So still a lot to learn for you, for sure.
Yeah, quite a bit. And again, once you put cattle into that pasture and they start tearing down all the bedding cover that's in the little bit of trees that's there, it completely changes the way the deer move through this particular spot.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah, that does happen for sure. So, well, you make it back to your second trip now. So what happens on the final day you get to launch this arrow?
So I had been out there the Friday after Thanksgiving that night, sat in the same patch of weeds. I had 27 does and 15 different bucks come through, and they had come off the neighbors. I had seen the big 9, we called him Prince. He was hanging out on a neighbor's tree line, and literally there was about 8 different groups of does between 3 and 7 that would funnel out, and they'd come all the way across this open pasture, and as they would funnel out, literally all these bucks are just in staging zones in this pasture, and as soon as the does walk past them, they're walking from point A where they're at to point B on the other side of the pasture across that doe's trail to see if one's hot, and then they're just standing there waiting for the next group to pass, and then they're walking back to point A. And once all the does had jumped and gotten into the cut corn, here they all come. And Prince decided that he was not going to leave the tree line that night. So the only buck that came into the field was the big broken up 8. Had him at 62 yards, and the field rolls down to the west, and literally all I had was his throat patch and head. Had a doe 29 yards in front of me, and all of a sudden she just stopped, decided that was close enough to be to the decoys, and she didn't like it, and threw her tail up and just kind of sauntered and jumped and bounded off to the north and cleared the field for me.
Oh, geez.
So Saturday and Sunday, I literally looked at my brother and I said, I'm done. I said, I'm not going to go back there. It's late enough. They don't want anything to do with decoys. It's not going to work. They're back on feeding patterns. I can't get in there and be anywhere in that field where I feel like I would have a potential opportunity. So all day Saturday and all day Sunday, we decided we were just going to change it up completely. So we hunted Saturday morning and hunted over a transition area, and I saw a 2.5-year-old 7-point coming from one bedding area through the transition zone going to another one. Got back to the house and decided to do some upland bird hunting and spend some time with Dad, just the 3 of us. And Sunday we took it easy, went out midday, did some glassing, trying to find a buck that was bedded on his own or with a doe, and nothing we could find was mature or wasn't just completely thrashed and broken up. So I had taken vacation on Monday and Tuesday because it's a long enough drive. I knew I would need 1 full day to drive, and I wanted to be able to use as much time as possible. So Tuesday was my drive day, so I only had Monday left. It was 4 degrees that morning. We've got a property we hadn't sat on in 2 weeks. Hadn't even went in and looked at trail cameras on it, so we didn't know what was around. And we went ahead and went out. We sat till 10 o'clock. Between the 2 of us, we saw one little dink. And Austin was checking traps, and he goes, I'm not probably going to make it to you in time. He goes, if you're going to do an evening sit, you need to just go. And the only place I knew for sure where we had been seeing any deer consistently was that cornfield. So I took all 3 of my decoys in. I went to that little erosion ditch, and I put everything out. So I had a my setup was the Flambeau Boss Buck, which is a 3D decoy, and he was straight to my south at 17 yards. I had the Ultimate Predator doe decoy on my bow in the little erosion ditch, and then back behind me about 10 yards, I had the heads-up buck whitetail decoy on a brush clamp on a corn stalk, so it looked like there was a bedded doe between two bucks.
Sure.
And those deer started coming in the field, and they came farther up than I had anticipated them that night because of where the cattle were at. And so with about 20 minutes left of legal light, I went up that erosion ditch to the top of the hill to get some terrain between us, and managed to get in front of two does that this buck was behind, and grunt him into 55 yards, and the does decided it was enough for them. They take off. I still had his interest, managed to get the full draw, and just as I hit anchor, he decided he was going with what he knew, turns around, follows the does. They go south and then start going to the east right in front of me again. So I range the does, foul my sight, come to full draw again. He steps into my window in the row of corn I was in, pauses for just a second, looks at me, and starts moving again. Let down on him a second time, and they go to the next terrace over from me, and they start going north right past me on my left side. So I range the does as they're coming in, come to full draw as the second one comes through. This buck comes right in, stops for a second. Just as I start to apply pressure on my thumb button, he starts moving, and there's nothing for a mile around us. Wide open cornfield. I knew he would stop again. He took 7 steps. I stayed at full draw, and as soon as he stopped and looked at me that next time, pin settled and the shot broke, and he didn't go 45 yards.
Dang, so did they close the gap at all, Evan, on that journey kind of all the way around you? Did he get closer to 55 yards on that last shot? Or final shot, I should say?
He did not. He
did
not.
Well, that's a good poke.
Yeah, it ended up being a 63-yard shot.
Wow.
And the reason why I didn't want to stop him is if you've had any opportunity to listen to Randy Ulmer talk, or Levi Morgan, or any of these guys, like there's that zone, and we've all experienced it, whether that's 25 yards to 50 or whether that's 35 yards to 60. Everybody has that zone where we know a whitetail is going to react. And truly, whether it's a whitetail or a mule deer, you get on a mature animal, they're moving on the shot at that distance. And I completely agree with Randy's philosophy, where you hit that 60-yard plus mark, and they don't react like normal. Like, if they stop out there and they're looking at you, it's more of an evaluation. Like, they're comfortable with where they're at. There's enough distance between you that they're not going to react on a shot like that. You know, and I'm running a 440 grain arrow setup at 72 pounds, 28.5-inch draw. It's the quietest bow I've ever shot, and I'm getting 294 feet per second. If I let him stop on his own and kind of let him evaluate what he wants to versus I'm going to stop you and I'm going to get your focus on me more than it's already going to be, you're going to react if you hear something a second time.
Yeah, absolutely. You're basically alerting them. Yeah, and you kept it all natural.
Yep, and he stopped when he wanted to. I was already at full draw, and I knew as soon as he stopped, I needed to get aggressive with my shot. And that's exactly what happened. I already had my thumb on the button. He stopped. My pin was already there, and a little bit of pressure, and it wasn't even a full second between when he stopped and my arrow was released.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
So
that arrow sinks home. Were you just like, holy cow, finally, after 17 days of hard hunting? How exciting.
Literally, yeah, and the shot was slightly uphill because of the way the terraces were cut. So I jumped up, and I watched him get just out of view from the cut corn into the wheat stubble. And when he dropped, so did I. I mean, I went to my knees, rolled over onto my back, and I bet I laid there for about 10 minutes just trying to catch my breath and take it all in. So it's been a rough season for me. Extremely humbling. 2 trips to Colorado. Didn't even draw my bow on an animal in, I think it was 15 days. 2 trips to Kansas. Had hit a deer on the first trip on my last day when I finally got to draw my bow, and went in to recover him the next morning, and it was a non-lethal hit. He was bedded with a doe, and got in there. She didn't like it, and they took off, and he was running like he wasn't even touched. And then to go back on a second trip, and again, last minute, 10 minutes of legal light left, had drawn on this buck 3 times to finally have the opportunity to release and just let that arrow sink home. I've never heard an arrow sound so sweet, making that popping sound of hide.
Yeah,
so
I bet. I experienced that this year. I said that to you when we were, kind of messaging each other that sounds like a Brandon Hammond season, and man, that's what I remember vividly after, I spent 21 days here in Michigan hunting, full days, before I got a shot, and it just felt like, man, that it was a sweet shot, and that sound, just like exactly what you just said, you're like, that is one of the greatest things I've ever heard, and it feels so good, to accumulate that way and just, kind of end the season that way, so to speak, is amazing. So kudos to you as well, man. That's an amazing story.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, it definitely goes to show off-the-wall tactics can work, and again, just stay with it.
Yeah, it is a lot about grinding it out, and that's a great, takeaway in this podcast for sure, is just, continue to put the effort in, because you never know. The last day, the last moment, we've heard it before in other stories, it does really happen, but you have to be there and keep grinding it out for that to happen.
Yep. Yeah, and it's always interesting because I think every hunter can relate when you get into it and all of a sudden, it just seems like, no hunt's going your way. You're always having to make a second trip, or you're always taking it down to the wire. And I was notorious for it. The first 8-9 years I bow hunted, it seemed like I was always having to figure out how to make a second trip, or it literally came down to minutes of legal light left on the last day of getting it done. And I'll be honest, the last 4 years I have been extremely blessed, and I don't even know how to communicate. Literally everything fallen into place. 2016, found a piece of public ground and called a buddy that was out there. I was like, hey, I'm not going to be able to even look at this ground for 2 weeks. I've never been on it before. I didn't even know it was public. So I think it just went in the program this year. Do you mind running out and taking a look at it for me? And he did. He drove an hour to go out there and look at it for me. Saw 155-inch typical 10 whitetail and 170-inch muley. He goes, yeah, you need to come take a look at this. And I left Utah, drove straight through the night, changed in my truck, and 20 minutes after I left my truck at legal light, I've got a 30 1/4 inch mule deer on the ground. It scores 185 inches as a typical.
Jeez, oh Pete. That's crazy.
Go back the next year, do the same thing. I drive through the night, have a to-go bag. I meet up with my buddy and brother, throw all my gear in the truck. My wife finishes the 40-minute drive to my folks' place. We drive straight out there. I change in the truck. First light lifts. The fog goes away. We start hiking the fence line in. I look over on the neighbors. There's a solid buck with 2 does feeding in the cornfield. Grab the decoy, hit a grunt. He comes from 300 yards, jumps the fence in front of us. Boom. Oh, well, there's another 20-minute hunt. I've been in the state for not even 3 hours.
Wow. Unreal.
The 2018 season, my wife got her tag, so I had decided I wasn't going to hunt until she filled her tag. And the third sit we do, she shoots a 171-inch whitetail. And I'm like, well, this is going good. So go back, and I went back in the December in the late season, and I found a mid-180s mule deer, and it was actually on the property I killed the buck on this year. And he's with 27 total deer. There's 7 or 8 bucks, about 20 does, and they're up on the hill in the cut corn. I take my decoy and I go straight at him. I get to 55 yards, and he is perfectly broadside. With the wind chill, we figured we were between -15 and -20. And I draw back, and as soon as I let that arrow fly, my glue had crystallized, and all of my veins just disappear off my shaft. And it starts tumbling, and it tumbled, and I literally watched my arrow slap him completely vertical upside the body, right behind the front shoulder.
No way.
And I was like, well, I'm going to count that as a dead deer. And they just wandered off, and that was the last day of my season. So
that's insane.
I went back last year, called a buddy, said, hey, you got a hall pass from the wife? Yeah? Good. Meet me at this intersection. Let's go kill a mule deer. He meets me. He jumps in my truck. We drive 35 minutes. We get to the area that I glassed from. First thing, yep, there's a buck. Go straight in on him. He's got a hot doe. They leave the CRP patch they're in. They go about a quarter mile into a big limestone ravine. We reposition, come up over the top, and I shoot him in less than an hour on the same piece of public the other 2 bucks came off of.
No way.
So I had a string of a golden horseshoe, and someone decided it was time that I get a little piece of humble pie.
Yeah, time to work this time, for sure.
Yep.
So, well, one last question before we go, Evan. Did it kind of spark your? I know you said you're a self-proclaimed a little more of a mule deer hunter. Are you kind of, excited to hunt some whitetails now going forward?
I am. In fact, I talked to a couple buddies that over the years have always, come hunt with me in Oklahoma, or come to Colorado with me, come to Nebraska, and I'm like, you know what? Now I really want to. So I think I've got it figured out where if work will let me, I'm looking at the potential next year to do a 3 to 5 state whitetail tour.
Awesome.
So,
well, good deal, man. We'll definitely connect next year and do that during hunting season as well.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. Would love to get some more podcasts with you, and especially about whitetail, because that's what this podcast is mostly about. But that'd be phenomenal, and just that makes me excited to hear you kind of wanting to do a little more and step out of that mule deer box. It's kind of the same for me. Like, I love mule deer hunting, and I don't get to do it enough, and but nonetheless, it excites me, that crossover aspect, because I think there's so much to learn from both species.
Yep. Yep. And again, I know I'm in that unique situation where Western Kansas, you have that opportunity where, my tag is good for either species. And I've had opportunities at mule deer out of some of my tree stands when I was hunting whitetails, and I've been fortunate to kill, 2 really nice whitetails on the same piece of property using my mule deer tactics and being on the ground. And
right.
It's fun using a tactic that I would rather, I'd rather be on the ground. I'd rather have the ability to put things in my favor and be aggressive and hunt. It's a more familiar style to me, and be able to go after either species and have some fun with it.
Yeah, no, it's super cool, and that's why I think this such a great podcast, and a lot of the whitetail guys are going to love it, because it's it takes away the part that people don't like about whitetail hunting, and that's sitting around and having patience, and it gives you that little bit of that ability to use that patience for when it really counts, but to kind of be aggressive, which I love, and I think a lot of guys will really appreciate that, and it's just great to learn. So, but awesome story, man, and thanks, Evan, for being on, and it's awesome buck, and like I said, when the new models roll out, let's get back together, and then obviously, man, I can't wait to talk to you about next year's whitetail season.
Oh, looking forward to it, buddy.
All right, man, thanks so much for being on again.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
All right, and we'll see you guys next week. As you know, you can find us on the Unfiltered Outdoor app and Amazon Music as well. Download every week on iTunes, and we'll see you guys next week.